Hi everyone, welcome to my channel. Today's going to be my first wrap up. It'll be my August wrap up. And I have 5 books here to go over. In total, I read 4 books, fully finished. One of them I'm only halfway through at this point. It's exciting for me because, well, the first 2.5 months of the year I was like reading like crazy, a lot more than I normally used to. I read about 18 books in the first 2.5 months, and then I bought a house and my life got kind of busy and hectic, and so I had to stop reading. Not that I had to, but I ended up losing the drive for it and the time for it. And at the end of July, I just picked it back up, and I've been reading nonstop ever since. So 5 books or 4.5 books in 1 month is pretty good for me at this point. A lot of them were rather thick books, so that contributes to why there's so few of them compared to other booktubers who can probably read like 8 to 11 books a month. Ugh, I couldn't, I don't think. So I'm going to go in these in chronological order and start with A Little Life by Hanya Yanagihara. Wow. So I picked this book up a few months ago because I really wanted a book that would actually make me feel something, actually make me emotional. And there was a lot of people on YouTube who've read this book and recommended it for that same reason. So I decided to read it, and I liked it. I went back and forth for a minute thinking, is it exploitative? Is it good? Like, I really, I couldn't tell personally. But I settled on that I think it's really good because that's what I wanted out of the book. I wanted something to exploit my emotions to the point that I would cry, and that's what I got. So it succeeded at its job, so I would say that it's good. If your parameters for a book are different than that, then, and you don't want to read something that's traumatic and abuse and violence and just general trauma, don't read it. Don't read it. This story is about 4 boys who grow up together from college age on to an adulthood, and it mainly focuses on one of the boys, Jude, and his relationships with the other 3 boys. And there's heavy emphasis on Jude's life because it's sort of a mystery to the other boys, or I guess I should say men, because they are all grown adults. Jude, his life's a mystery, and the book kind of eventually does delve into his past. There are good parts of his current life that he's just not fully allowing himself to accept because of his traumatic childhood, and it's very sad. It's a very sad book, and I didn't cry until, I'm not kidding you, the exactly last page. The very last page brought me to tears, and I cried for about 2 hours. Nothing else in the book made me cry, didn't even make me whimper. So I don't know what's up with me, but that last page made me bawl. I'll say that just to be vague, it had brought back something from earlier in the book that, by that point you would have forgotten about it potentially. And it brought it back, and it was, to me, the most gut-wrenching part of the book. It just tore me to pieces. But I really liked it. I don't know what else to say about it. The next book I read is The Diary of a Young Girl by Anne Frank. Keeping on with like a general trauma and sadness kind of theme, I guess. Those are the tones of my books this month, I would say. This book, though, it did make me cry, but it made me cry for, you know, tears of heartache and sadness, but also tears of joy and just not that I was happy, but just the maybe the naivety of a young girl writing this. It makes you hopeful. That's the word I'm looking for, not happiness. Tears of hopefulness. The thing that I kept thinking about while reading this was that this book was never meant to be a book. It was never meant to be read by millions of people. It is the private thoughts and feelings of a teenage girl, and she is so smart. And well, I'll tell you why I'm saying that. So it starts off, she's been gifted this diary or this journal, and she's just kind of starting to figure out like what she wants to write about, what she wants to do with this. And almost as soon as she is gifted this journal, she has to go into hiding with her family. And she understands exactly what's happening around her. Maybe she doesn't understand why it is the way it is, but she fully understands, you know, that this is happening and that this is the government and this is the police state and this is everything. So she very quickly in the book goes over those details. Like, you have full context to almost everything that happens in her life because she has context for why it's happening. So she's very smart, and I mean, I know this is translated, so I don't know exactly like, you know, what the original Dutch would have been, but she has a very nice vocabulary, a very nice compelling way of writing that kids her age in these times just do not have. And I think it's a very impressively written diary. It is overwhelming towards the end, just because you know what's coming, and you know, I would recommend anyone to read this. Just do it. Just do it. The next, oh, I forgot a book. It's because I read it on audiobook. So I actually read 5.5 books this month, not 4.5. I knew there was something wrong with that figure, and I was like explaining it away, just trying to justify it, because I was like, I don't know. Anyways, so I did listen to an audiobook, Severance by Ling Ma. It was okay. It didn't do what I wanted it to do for me. I didn't really set expectations for it necessarily, but it really wasn't what I kind of wanted from it. So Severance is about a virus that spreads, a global pandemic that occurs, and this was written in like 2011 or something, and it is a fungal virus, and it affects, I think they're called the fevered, and it affects your brain functioning to the point that over the course of like 2 or 3 weeks you slowly lose sense of yourself, and then it is like fatal, like completely fatal, 100%. So the story, it jumps in time a little bit from before the virus happened and then after the virus, and now they're in this kind of post-apocalyptic environment. The main character, she's a Chinese immigrant herself to New York City, where she works as a publishing agent for Bibles being sent to China. And the interesting part of the book to me was when the virus happened and how this was affecting the industries and how this was affecting the world on a like economic scale, on a social scale, just for those few weeks or months that it was happening. That was interesting to me. I almost wish it would have stayed there. The rest of the book, it talked a little bit about her parents when they immigrated to America, and I got a little like detached at that point, And then after the virus, when she's with this crew of people who are protecting each other, but it ends up kind of malevolent and scary, and it wasn't, to some people that might actually sound like a good thing, like if I say that this book was scary and malevolent at a certain point, but I just want to express to you that it doesn't go the way you think it would go if I say that it's scary and malevolent, because there is an underlying anxiety to it, but it doesn't actually manifest itself into anything. The book just kind of ends. So I was really disappointed. The next book I read was Homegoing by Yagi Yasi. I picked this up because her new book, Transcendent Kingdom, is getting a lot of rave reviews, and I really wanted to read something of her work. This was amazing. It is a story about two sisters who don't know they're sisters, and then they have descendants who one side ends up in Africa and one side is in America. And it's heartbreaking in certain parts. The sense of family in this book never really went away, even though it did go away. They lost each other. These families lost each other, and yet they didn't. And it really shows how your past affects you and you don't even know it, how there are forces at work that you just aren't even aware of. It's a decently short book. It's simple read. It's very, like, once you pick it up, you don't want to put it down because it is just such a breezy read. So that is Homegoing. Next, I read Schindler's List, also known as Schindler's Ark in certain publications. It is the book that influenced the movie by Steven Spielberg, Schindler's List. And this book, I've had it for a couple years. As you can tell, I annotated it, and that was because as I was reading it, there was so much of it that I liked. There was so much of it that I wanted to remember. And so I started annotating it, and I was really happy to have those little flags to use because I'd never used them before. So this book is a nonfiction, if you didn't know, and it's written in a narrative structure. It's written somewhat like a novel because the author had so many people who were willing to contribute their knowledge of Oskar Schindler to him, and that made him able to actually write this story in a narrative structure. It's so good. The author has a very poetic way of writing things as well, so even though it's nonfiction, it just really doesn't feel like it. If you aren't aware of this story, it is about Oskar Schindler, who was a capitalist industrialist in occupied Poland, and he owns a pottery factory, I think, and he employs a few thousand Jews, and he is considered a war essential industry. So even though he's employing these Jews, the government is not going to take them away from him to a concentration camp because his company is part of the war effort. He wasn't the most wealthy or the most well-known or the most well-respected industrialist during this time. There were others that were more so, but he had enough sway to be able to protect his workforce. He used his powers for good, and the way that he protected and kept his people safe, those moments where they had to be protected by him were so fulfilling. They filled my soul with so much warmth. It's another book that I would highly recommend anyone to read. It wasn't difficult to read. You don't get lost with the names and places, even though they might be a different language to your own. It was very, easy to read. It was enjoyable and it was informative, and you will come away from this book feeling like there's hope in the world, and that's what we all need right now. Next is, well, something that I'm currently in the middle of reading. This is how far I'm about a little over halfway through. The Brothers Karamazov by Fyodor Dostoevsky. I've been saying that name over and over and over. I love it. I love saying it. Fyodor Dostoevsky. It's awesome. So, this is a classic. It's a Russian classic. I've wanted to read this book since I was like 16 years old, and I finally purchased it, just a used copy. This one's translated by David Margarshak, and I've realized that translations are like a really key element for some people, some readers, especially of the Russian translations. So I might want to read this book in a different translation one day, maybe a newer one, because this David Margarshak, he wrote this book with his translation in like the 50s. So like I said, I've been wanting to read this book since I was like 16. I saw a lot of quotes from it in various places, and something about those quotes was always like, I've got to read that book. That's on my list. I've got to read it. And I finally started reading it, and I'm really loving it so far. It's very engaging, but it's also very dense and overwhelming at times, just because you can get kind of lost. You can kind of forget, like, where are we going? Who are you talking to? Why did we come here? Why are we talking to them? So it can be difficult if you're not really paying attention. But this follows the story of three brothers who are the sons of a moderately wealthy, but now becoming impoverished landowner. And their father is like just a total douchebag from the perspective of the town, and his sons all have different perspectives on life. They were all raised very differently from each other, so they all have very, very, very different perspectives on life. So this book is really philosophical in a way, because we're looking at each brother and we're going like, this is what they think, this is why they think this way, this is their perspective on the world, this is their perspective of themselves and of the other people around them. I think that there's like some sort of joke with this one where, you know, you're either an Ivan or a Dmitri or an Alyosha, who are the brother. Those are the brothers' names. So most people, I think, who read this book believe themselves to be an Ivan, because Ivan is like the rational atheist type, and Dimitri's like, I would say he's more like a simple-minded jock, you know, toxic masculinity, aggressive kind of thing. And then Alyosha is like a very sweet, endearing young boy, and I don't relate to any of them. Maybe it's a male thing, I don't know. But the big part of this book is the section called The Great Inquisitor. Great Inquisitor is like a big thesis of the book, and people come away really loving it. I can't remember a single part of that book, but you know whose part I do remember a lot? Father Zosima. Father Zosima is a character who is like Alyosha's religious mentor, and Father Zosima, and I'm really sorry if I'm pronouncing these names wrong. I have nothing to go off of on this besides just the written word. But yeah, Father Zosima's parts, those are the parts that resonate with me in terms of, you know, okay, I actually understand what you mean by what you're saying. I actually kind of can relate this to my own life. It's meaningful enough for me to be able to take it away from the book with me. The Grand Inquisitor didn't do that for me. But I'm gonna keep reading it. Like I said, I'm a little over halfway through. I'll probably finish it within the next week or so. And I'm really happy to have my hands on it. Those are all my books for the month. And thank you guys for checking in with me. Thanks for hanging out with me for a little while I do this. I don't know what my plans are for the channel going forward, except I do have one thing planned out that I'm working on, and I'm really excited about that. You guys just leave a comment, subscribe, or not. That's okay. Thanks.